The story begins today in intensive care, where the patient lies unconscious and the doctors have been trying to save his life for several hours in a row, but he is still bleeding heavily and his pressure is dropping. The doctors do start to panic a little and ask the assistants to quickly bring a bag of blood for transfusion and apply a clamp to stop the bleeding. They all begin to look at the monitor, which indicates that the heart rate has fallen below normal. It is really very, very difficult for the patient now. That it looks like the iron they removed earlier caused a very severe infection, which made the surgeon very surprised and nervous, as he did not understand how this was possible. But there was practically no time to think, because if they continue to delay, then a cardiac arrest will occur and the patient will die, so it is necessary to resuscitate the heart and lungs. In the meantime, the apparatus began to show very disappointing indicators, and indeed this corresponded to the fact that the patient was already on the verge of death. Then one of the assistants turned to the doctor, and told him the disappointing news that the patient's heart had completely stopped, so they had just lost him. No matter how hard he tried to contain his emotions, but he did not succeed. He needed to be informed that the patient was no longer alive. All due to the fact that he remembered the words of his mother, who approached the doctor before the operation and asked if everything would be fine with her boyfriend. He really did not know how to react to this and how to approach his mother and report such sad news. He remembered how she cried and begged to help him, and also talked about how much he suffered because of such a stupid mother. He also remembered that she told him that this is the only son and the only reason and purpose for which she lives on this earth at all. The doctor once again looked at the patient, who continued to lie under anesthesia and did not breathe at all. In addition, he replayed the words of the patient's mother dozens of times, and very reluctantly closed his eyes and exhaled deeply. On the operating table, in stick era, they lowered their hands into their hands and continued to look at the patient, making a moment of silence. They recorded the patient's time of death and the underlying cause, an infection from a wound that resulted in brain death due to excessive bleeding. The patient was already unconscious and indeed he did not need an anesthesia tube. Meanwhile, his mother was sitting in the waiting room, praying that the operation would be really successful. She continued to cry and did not know how she could help her son, so she had no choice but to hope for a positive result during the operation. At that moment, the doors opened and one of the doctors came out. This surprised everyone else very much, because the operation is not over yet, so it was arrogance. Therefore, the chief surgeon ordered everyone to quickly return to their seats, as well as prepare a log book and the patient's vital signs. The doctor immediately ordered the blood transfusion to be speeded up as well, and also said to check the metal object removed from the patient's body, and also, since there were enough necessary instruments on the table, the doctor decided to suggest another test for tetanus. The doctor also took off his mask, which is strictly forbidden to do in operating rooms, but the thought began to visit him that they really still have an excellent chance to save the patient. At that moment, all surgeons were surprised, because is there any point in operating on an already dead patient? But the doctor was resolute, and said that now everything is really different. Probably the rumors about this doctor have not yet reached him. He was special, because he always took on the most difficult tasks, and saved the lives of those people who could not be returned, although he went all the time without a mask. No one even guessed until recently about his abilities. But when he arrived, the operation resumed again, because he is the one who can even pull out the dead from the next world, and all this in the literal sense of the word. His name was Shin Yu-sun. He is also better known by the nickname, God Hands, so he also decided not to waste time, and wearing his mask, he proceeded to the operation. Really, some magical processes began on the cardiogram and the heartbeat gradually began to recover, which was really hard to believe. After a few hours of work, after all, the operation was a success, and in the operating room everyone began to scream and rejoice together, because it was really an excellent job, after which the patient was saved. And after a hard day, you really need to relax somehow, so the doctor took a can of drink and opened it. He decided to relax a little and have a drink, as he was really tired after the operation, and he also realized that he would spend his entire vacation in the hospital again. When he came out of it and looked at the excellent view of the city, he realized that he really had not had a normal rest for a very long time. Again today he spent the whole day in the operating room, despite the fact that he had a day off. He looked at the sky and did not understand why life is so cruel. At that moment, a big announcement also appeared, which tells us that these are indeed the hands of a god. It was already dark, but his nickname was given for a reason, but all because he can save even dead people. As he himself reports, at first he even liked it, and his main motivation was the joy that formed after saving the dying, as this is really a talent, to pull people out of the other world. However, he lay in his bed and was really in pain, all due to the fact that he did not have time to rest at all, after various rumors that spread throughout the city. Now every time he is entrusted with the treatment of really very important and wealthy patients whose lives must be saved. It is mistaken for portable medical devices that can be used at any time. But he understood that he would not last so long, so something was needed in life. He looked with his tired eyes at his hands and he was really interested in understanding what the title of the Hand of God, which he was presented with, means. It's really not easy, because of this, all the doctors began to be afraid of him and avoid him, so now it has become more like a mockery. He took a deep breath and really decided to think about when was the last time he rested and did not work under supervision and pressure. Choosing the next can of soda, he understood that at least he would earn a lot of money, but he didn't have time to even spend it. He smiled and looked at the bottom, realizing that perhaps you are some moment of your life. He still turned the wrong way, so as soon as he returns home, he will drink another can of beer and relax a bit. Suddenly, a bus drove sharply at him at great speed, which the guy obviously did not see while he was moving straight in his direction. The headlights began to dazzle his glasses and, as he himself liked to say, when a person dies, his whole life flashes before his eyes. This is exactly what happened to our hero. He really began to remember all his most interesting and intimate moments. But basically, everything that he had in his thoughts, as well as his whole practical life, was spent in the operating room. He even himself really became very interested. Why does he see only memories from the operating room? But there was already critically little time for reflection, and his bag flew into the air right from his hands. And almost immediately a white bright flash appeared, which informed the whole world that the brilliant surgeon was no longer alive. Meanwhile, the weather was really very good outside. Everything was happening in the ancient city, the building of which was very similar to a castle. Out of the leaves, someone started screaming and calling out to a guy named Ray. It was the name of our surgeon, who still could not understand whose voice it was. The girl noticed that he seemed to be trying to open his eyes now. But didn't he die? The surgeon looked at his hands, which really rejuvenated a lot, and was very surprised by this, because he did not understand what was wrong with them. At that moment, his new family approached him, who noticed that the guy had already woken up. They were very happy about this. Ray was really very surprised, and it seems he began to understand what had just happened. The family continued to rejoice and hug their child, rejoicing in every moment, because how can a child be so sweet when awake? In addition, his new father reported that the guy really looks very much like his mother, which is why he is so cute. She continued to hug her son and was really very happy, but the guy himself really didn't like it, because he absolutely could not understand what was happening to him now. But the only question that tormented him, at that moment, while the new environment looked at him, was why is he still alive? And while he was trying to figure out who all these people who were starting to squeeze him were, the girl made a remark to the guy, saying that he should do everything much more gently, as it could hurt the child. The surgeon did not understand what kind of small body he had, why everyone wants to squeeze it very hard. Was he really reborn as the child of these two? And after analyzing this situation, he realized that then these people look like his parents, but what kind of clothes are they wearing? Are they cosplayers? The girl took her child in her arms and began to apologize to him for the fact that dad hurt him a little with his beard, from which the child had a small cut. They looked at his hand and were very frightened, just like the child who noticed that his hand was injured. Panic very much after he learned that Rei had hurt himself. He offered to call a priest to heal him. It was really obvious that he was panicking and had never had any experience with a child. But the girl reassured him and said that it was just a scratch, and there was nothing wrong with that. She put it on the surface and said that she herself could cure him without problems, which surprised the child very much. I wonder how she is trying to cure him, most importantly from what? He looked at her eyes and at the surface and said that she herself could cure him without any problems, which surprised the child very much. I wonder how she is trying to cure him, most importantly from what? He looked into her eyes and began to study even more superficially. Is she really a doctor too? And then he realized that in fact the ointment can leave a scar, but he did not know how I could tell about it. But the girl used her magic and, without touching the child at all, created a magical power that began to heal his hand. He was very surprised, because she immediately healed, which he had never seen before, for all the time of his work as a surgeon. At this moment, he once again analyzed his hand and looked at it, and realized that this is not medicine, so it means magic? And his mother began to laugh and said that the operation was over, and the wound really didn't seem to exist. The guy looked at his hand and was very happy, just like his parents, because not a single trace of the wound was visible at all. The girl began to laugh, and said that she had said that she could handle it herself. Thanks to this, her father exhaled heavily with relief and said that she had not yet lost her magical abilities. And the surgeon, having heard that the word magic had just sounded, concluded that it looks like now he is a completely different person, and has he really been reborn in another world? Well, in the meantime, it was already getting dark outside and the whole family began their preparation for bed. Parents decided to put a small child to bed, but he could not sleep for a very long time, as he thought about his new business and the meaning of life. He woke up a few hours later and was very alert, and also noticed the fact that he hadn't slept in such a long time. 3 months have passed since he was reborn in this world, and during this time he understood a lot from their conversations. This world is really completely different from the world in which the surgeon lived before, as if it were a fantasy world. This is where the lives of monsters and people begin at the same time, as well as other creatures that fight with each other. Because of this, people can be attacked at any time by monsters and various orcs. The villagers also say that they have to develop their strength and dedicate themselves to their chosen profession from a young age. Meanwhile, my mother approached Rei and decided to cure him. Another feature of this world, magic, which is developed here instead of science. Whenever Sane heals a child's wounds, he always resorts to magic, not medicine, as was the case before in his world. It really was a very amazing life that the surgeon really deserved. He managed to realize that everything where he is now is not a dream, but really a new reality, but for some reason, the memories and knowledge of his past life are also well preserved. He continued to sit in bed and look at the moon, because never before had he even thought that he was so lazy and likes to sleep. Come to think of it, in his past life he didn't even have a normal time for simple sleep. If he hadn't died in an accident then, he probably would have died from overwork, because the work of a surgeon is really a very difficult thing. And now, having been reborn, he can absolutely not think about it and rest exactly as much as he needs. When else will he have the chance to sit back and do nothing so much? Well, in the meantime, the night was coming to an end and there was a very beautiful pot with an unusual plant on the windowsill. It seems that he was also covered with magic, because he constantly attracted something to himself, and it was very strange. But in the meantime, white pimples scattered throughout the room, and while the guy was sleeping, everyone also continued to fly in the direction of that same magical plant. And he absolutely could not understand what it was was like a thin thread that pierced his body. There was such a light feeling that this is something incredible, because after 10 minutes of such a dream, the guy already felt very cheerful. Maybe this is the same mana that his parents were talking about. Having tried to manage it, the surgeon realized that it was really very difficult. And every time he tried to make her move, she just flew around. At this point, the guy still tried to focus on where the flow of mana begins and ends, since it really is no different from blood. If you imagine that it flows through his veins, then you can immediately feel how it will begin to fully fill his body. It was truly an infinite energy that was truly an art to master. But you really need to do this very, very slowly, trying to feel every breath and every movement of the body, like a leaf that floats on water. Or as if you are in a winter region, watching snowflakes fly in the wind. And it's really very difficult, but only through this diligent process, the first magical flame can appear from the hand. And finally, he succeeded. After such long years of training, he was able to prove to himself and for the first time created fire from his hand. He was very proud of himself, because he really could do it. He even began to cry, because at last he was able to use fire magic and he managed to direct mana in the right direction. It took him 3 whole years of hard work to do this. Somehow he managed to direct the flow of mana and remember the whole process. Remember absolutely everything that he read in books late at night. The only thing he didn't understand was the mana management manual. So far it was really very difficult for him. The method that was described in the book is the principle of accumulation of mother in the body and its rational use, and if it is replenished from the outside, then why should he accumulate it in the body? In addition, accumulating mana within yourself and then using it has some limitations, because no matter how you look at it, this is not an inefficient way to use it. The guy continued to read books to study this issue, and now he became interested. What if he prefers to use it freely, not trying to restrain it? After all, it is really much better to restore mana from the outside and immediately spend it. Thus, the need for mana circles will disappear. And he was able to come to this conclusion completely on his own, in his youth. But it is also the most dangerous method that is not described in any book, but it is definitely worth it. Even if the guy said that, he didn't even know if he would succeed, he thought he would have to do some more research on the subject. His parents were really surprised how a child can read so many books in his free time, but they were also very happy for him. It's really wonderful to see. They were very proud of him, because their main task was to raise a very good person out of him, as well as an equally strong magician. His father was very surprised, because with such a physique, a guy can definitely become a good swordsman. But his wife got ahead of him, because in this case, their baby Ray will turn into the same mountain of muscles, like his father himself. He got a little angry about this, but at least said that he was handsome. Well, the guy continued to read books in his spare time and study all the information about this Manu. But he still couldn't understand why the parents were hiding, if they were still talking so loudly. Anyway, the mother began to suspect a little something was wrong, so she turned to her husband and asked, "Does it not seem strange to you that he only does what he reads?" But this question confused him a little. What does she already mean? They looked at the guy again and said that ordinary children of his age want to play and walk on the street, but it seems to him that he is only interested in books. Well, he did not see any problem in this, and said that the mother should not worry. Isn't it good that he likes to study? In addition, she herself said that she wants to grow an excellent magician out of him. The girl looked at him and really agreed with this, although she did not say anything. But the guy heard all this and realized that he was still very far from this calling, so he needed to study very, very much. He continued to absorb one book after another, because he needed to finally learn how to restore his mana, moreover, to perfection. Another night passed in the process of studying books and the long-awaited morning came. His mother entered the room with a smile and greeted her child. But suddenly he continued to sit in the study of the book, and told his mother that he woke up a long time ago and continues to read, which she really started to cry and get a little nervous. Of course, reading books and learning is great, but in any case, he should frolic enough before he grows up. At that moment, the mother looked at her child once again and began to think that perhaps she really devotes little time to him. And then tears began to flow from her thoughts, because she had really been crying a lot lately. She walked up to her boyfriend and sat down across from him, asking if he wanted to play with his mom today. But this question turned out to be really much more difficult than one could imagine, so he surprised the guy. His eyes lit up. Was she really going to teach him magic? He was very happy with this offer, because she wants to educate her child through children's games. So he shouted and got up from his seat, said that he really wanted this very much, and dreamed of going to play with her. But the mother herself saw something wrong and it alarmed her very much. She ran up and hugged her son very tightly, realizing that he was very happy, which means that he had been waiting for this opportunity for a very long time. Well, the guy at that moment just endured all these hugs. He looked at his mother and just could not understand what she wants to do now. They went for a walk with her and it was not at all what he expected. He told her that there were no books here, so why did they come here? But Mom told him to put all the books aside today, so they will go outside and play better there. But Ray had completely different plans for today, saying that he would better go and do more and thanked for this opportunity. He didn't understand what was going on now. Why should he waste time playing games instead of practicing? The mother was very happy, because how can their baby say such beautiful words? Indeed, it is simply a delight to the ears of the mother of every child. She suggested that at least today he should go and unwind a little. But the guy was very surprised by this, because he didn't go out all the time, and also didn't plan to do it at all. But the mother insisted and asked only once to have fun with her on the street. And he hadn't really gone out since he was reborn. All his time was spent in the library and learning new skills. He didn't even know what the outside world looked like, so he smiled and immediately agreed, but just for once. That's great, then move forward right now. And when they had already left, the guy constantly looked around, because he could not believe that now this is his new reality, and the world in which he is now completely different from the one that was before. And yes, it's true, it was a very small beautiful town, with a cozy atmosphere, which was really a pleasure to be in. He looked at the very water in which the leaves floated and noticed the fact that for the last 3 years he only did yours, that he read books sitting at home. He looked at the beautiful windmills and fired, and also said that he could not even think about going outside and was like a beast that was locked in a cage. And all these thoughts began to press a little on his small young head, which really made him think about the current state. At that moment, his mother smiled and looked in his direction. It was clear that he was thinking about something very much, so she asked if everything was all right with him. But the guy did not know how to react correctly, and what to answer, so his mother suggested that he just look and run around this territory. They immediately began to do this, because there was no reason to worry or think about the difficult philosophical life. The guy was very happy, because after a past life as a surgeon, he finally had free time, as well as the opportunity to be a little happy, also to be a child. That is why he tried to live each of these moments in a special way, and also I absolutely did not distract them with what difficult adult tasks. At that moment, he really felt like a real child, which he actually was, but this time, it was really possible to worry about absolutely nothing. He was very happy and really couldn't believe that now this was his new reality. The sky was simply beautiful, as if it had been created at all for this moment and this work. In addition, the guy came with his mother to the top of the rock, from which there was a really beautiful view of the lake and the fir trees that grew near it. Indeed, this surprised the guys very much, because for the long years that he spent in the operating room, he never had time to see such beautiful edges and views and moments, so for him it was just surprise and pleasure. Before he was reborn, he didn't even have time to stop, he kept running and running all the time. He lived for the sake of others, and therefore he was sick of himself, because he simply had to survive. All of this paralleled the fact that he was the chief surgeon who saved every life except his own. He continued to look at this beautiful view and was finally happy, because he had never felt so free before, and expressed great gratitude for the fact that he was lucky to be reborn in this world. He smiled and immediately decided to share this moment with his mother, so he turned to her. He turned and looked at her with his sweet childlike smile. After that, together they began to look at the sky, and the guy himself began to thank her for having opened this world to him. But the thoughts of the old work still could not leave him, because he constantly remembered how he worried about each patient and sent him to the operating room. It was in life where he was constantly busy with patients and performed various examinations and operations. He recalled how an assistant approached him and reported that the next operation would be in 5 minutes, at that moment when he was just sitting in his office and leaning against the wall, begging at least someone to save him from overwork. And he remembers it as a terrible dream, since it could not continue like this anymore. It was really his limit. At that moment, black and white dots and flashes began to appear in front of him. These were very scary memories that made him panic and worry very much about this situation. He screamed in panic that it was cardiac fibrillation, at that moment when his mother tried to hug the guy and calm him down. She smiled and asked if he was just having a nightmare. But it was just a dream. He really did have a very good time with his mom, but why did he have such a terrible dream? He opened his eyes and looked away and wept a little. Meanwhile, the weather was still really great outside, and the city continued to live its own life, although there weren't many people there now. He remembered that he was reborn in this world, therefore those very dreams visited him, so the old life decided to remind himself. But the guy looked at the next building, saying that this time he lives this life completely different from the past. And so far, everything was very much like paradise, the people were friendly, and the trees and bushes continued to grow, delighting everyone around every day. It was time to return home, so my mother happily informed my father about this, saying that they had already arrived. At that moment he cleaned the room a little. Also very happy about such a walk, and said that he had something. He jerked his mother's dress sharply, trying to get her attention. He looked at her with his cute and childish eyes, asking her to do a small favor for him, namely to teach him magic. From such a proposal, his mother was very surprised and frightened, because she did not expect that it would happen so quickly. So she asked her husband, how can he be so cute? And fell on him from happiness. She was very pleased with such an offer, so she asked the child if he was already impatient to learn magic. But since he wants so badly, she will gladly teach him. He was very happy with this answer and continued to smile, as he never seems to be able to get used to such a reaction. But my mother was ready for this, so she asked why he wants to start training. But the guy answered in the affirmative that he wanted to study the element of fire, so the mother immediately activated the fire and showed it to her child. He was really very happy, because he understood that his mother was really a real professional in her field, but he did not show any special emotions. She was a little frightened and surprised by such a reaction, because how could this be? She just got fire. Isn't it amazing why the guy made absolutely no reaction? So Mom started waving her fingers, asking if the magic was too weak. But the guy just said that he had already used such magic so many times, so you definitely shouldn't be offended by this. To begin with, the mother invited the guy to sit down. We are looking for, of course, he immediately agreed. She looked at him and decided to let him know that magic is really not that simple. It is the magic that they are using now that must first be transformed into mandu. And when you use a spell, for example, fire, then the magic quickly comes into action and everything works out. The guy looked at her with surprised eyes and was very happy, because at last they began to teach him magic. But he still had another question that haunted him. He asked his mother if there is any other way to transform Manu. This made her think a little, and so she asked the guy to explain a little what he means. She wanted to know if, for example, it was possible to transform fire or something like it. Mom explained to him that first he must spend mana, and then you restore it. All this happens due to the force of friction, as a result of which the same fire is formed. The guy waved his hands and said that there is a much easier way to convert mana just once, instead of 3, right? But in this case, the mana reserves will quickly run out. The girl was very surprised by such a question, and also did not understand why he began to ask such difficult questions. She quickly thought and said that everything is already possible, there is some sense in this. She smiled and said that if all these three actions can be stabilized into one, then it is quite possible to realize everything. Anyway, at least in theory. At that moment, in their large three-story house, everything was also going on for a long and amazing atmosphere, during which the guy received new knowledge. He put his finger to his lips and began to think about what stabilization really means. It turns out that in its final form it will be possible to improve the properties. He looked at his hand, which, after another magic, began to extract his fire. And this surprised him very much, and also made his mother think several times more, because the flame that formed from his hand was very frightened and surprised her, especially since all this happened in their house. But the guy did not think about what happened in the house, he was pleased with the thought that at last everything worked out for him. At that moment, the flame woke up the father, who immediately approached them and decided to clarify what was happening here. Why did the fire appear in the house? Mom also panicked a little and didn't even know what to say. She looked at the guy and said that he was able to use magic himself, she didn't even understand how it happened at all. When using magic, a mana flow inevitably occurs, which made her think very hard. To be honest, she still feels really bad about the process, but shouldn't he feel the same way too? But this experiment did set their room a little on fire. The guy sat and continued to analyze this situation, because it is easier for him to figure it out if you imagine that this is an atom. And to interact with mana, you will not need to keep it inside. To him, and he continued to sit and think about this topic, but the fact that he was still a child did not leave her alone. She looked at him and I was very excited and scared, but the guy smiled and only said that he seemed to have gone too far. He looked at his mother and tried to somehow smooth this situation with his pretty little eyes, asking what happened to her now. But she also did not know what to say, because just a child can already use magic himself, for which she is very proud of him. The guy also smiled and was embarrassed and asked if she really thinks so. He seems to be a genius. But the mother also continued to praise him and be happy for him, because their son is really very cool. Meanwhile, at night of the same day, some strange things began to happen. This has already become a problem for a guy who woke up in the middle of the night from some strange sounds. It was his father and mother who began to sit at the table and discuss what they would do if suddenly the guy was called to the academy at such a young age. So they decided to do everything in my power to prevent this from happening. The guy woke up so abruptly, and could not understand really now everything that was happening. Was it they who were discussing it? But after all, my mother also understood that it was not so easy to do this. She claimed that her son is really a genius who is born once in 100, no, in 1,000 years. If, after all, he will attract the attention of the academy, then what will they still need to do? They still tried to find an answer to this question. Ray also had no idea what academy they were talking about, but also understood that it seemed like he might be forcibly taken there because of his abilities. That's why he ate his hand into a fist and said to prevent it, he needs to become even stronger, before he tried to learn magic for fun. But from that moment everything has changed, now he is determined to study it further, because the absolute power over magic is quite comprehensible to him. In the meantime, the weather was really very beautiful outside, birds were sitting in the trees. Some silhouettes were visible in the window, it seems that there really was someone there. There was some kind of menu, as well as a book and a candle, which had already been burning since the morning. Ray woke up and stretched, as he practically didn't sleep last night as he studied magic. He looked out the window and was very surprised that it was already morning outside and another sleepless and interesting night had flown by. He did not leave his room all the time, so he did not even notice how time flies. It is really very strange, because he spent all his time studying magic. Then, should he still go outside and start to explore this world, because he is already 15 years old, 10 of which he is constantly learning and improving his skills in magic. Mana research experiments gradually increased Rei's skill levels. And his ingenious understanding of how mana actually works went to a completely different level. He could sit quietly in his room and meditate, creating holograms of magic around him. This became the basis of his rapid development, which is why he himself began to study books from an early age so as not to waste his time. Due to the fact that he absorbed a large amount of mana, his hair became really pure white. He did not know if his knowledge of medicine would be useful, but he was sure that this component should be taken in the same way for study. He understood that in any case it was worth trying it, and he wrote on the tablet that he was ready to heal sick people. He was really very shocked, because his new reality still began to connect him a little with his previous life, where he also remembered that before the exit, which he had the last time, there was a lot of fire and absolutely everything changed beyond recognition. At that moment, there was both wind and ice, as well as a lot of really amazing magical things. Due to the fact that the guy constantly studied magic, he was able to synchronize all the elements from his finger, and also began to control them very confidently. And all this at the age of 15, while all his peers still continued to play games on the street. He smiled and clutched his head, because he realized that this is the ideal future that he built for himself, because very soon he will be able to become one of the most powerful and successful magicians in history, just like he did before in surgery. The weather was really very beautiful outside, the sun had just come out and began to illuminate all the roads that were here. Suddenly, he began to move the wooden stick very hard, emitting not very pleasant squeaks. But there was nowhere to go, since it was part of his plan. He stood right in the center of the city with a sign in which he promised to heal all sick people. He began to cough, because he realized that it was really a little embarrassing, but there was nothing wrong with that, since he was completely confident in his abilities. He remembers that in his previous life he was a brilliant surgeon, so now he decided to also use his favorite skills to help people, just like in his past life. He began to shout that he could cure absolutely any person, so he asked to bring him as many patients as possible. His parents rejoiced, because at last their child began to do what he loved and enjoyed it. But not everyone was happy to see the young guy, as the inhabitants of the city very quickly approached him and began to ridicule the novice magician, saying that he had better go home and play doctor there. They began to mock and say that he really is the same sick person. Rei didn't like it very much. He didn't think that people would treat him like that, because what do they even know about him? Of course, he did not expect this, so he grabbed his head and smiled, because he understood that in order for people to begin to appreciate him, it takes quite a bit of time. Someone to approach him, but it was already getting dark outside. He fell to his knees and threw his sign. He was very upset because no one came up to him. He had already begun to get ready, because he realized that today he would definitely not be able to do anything. That is why you need to return home, but suddenly a girl appeared in front of him, which surprised him a little. The guy looked up at her and barely held back his tears, but the girl really came with an interesting offer, or rather, she wanted to ask, can a guy really heal a sick person? The girl was very much surprised, but no less than Rei. She was very interested in whether he could really heal any particular patient. The guy liked this idea, because now his first patient appeared in front of him. He began to raise his hands and really rejoice, like a little child, which is what he was. But the girl just looked at him again and asked if he really could do it or not. But Rei first needs to familiarize himself with his condition before answering such questions. The girl looked at him and also burst into tears a little. It was noticeable that she was really unhappy. She got very angry and began to insult the guy, because how can such a small child like him heal a sick person? Therefore, she began to insult him and leave. He was really very surprised by such an expression in his direction, so he simply smiled, absolutely expecting such a standard and banal reaction. He looked at the leaving girl and began to address her, which she certainly could not expect. Rei was very serious and said that maybe he looked like a 15-year-old boy. But there is not a single patient in this world whom he cannot cure. He was very self-confident, so he ordered the girl not to judge him by his young face. The girl was very surprised that the guy said such smart things. She could not understand why he was so angry, because he really is still a child. Once again she looked at him and did not know why, but she had great trust and respect for him, because she felt a strong doctor in him. So she turned around and apologized, admitting that she really was wrong. Whereupon she asked him for permission to introduce herself. She was the only daughter of Viscount Gate, a girl named Gate von Elisa. She looked at the guy and said that she was not his little girl. He was also a little surprised by this, but he also introduced himself and said that his name was Ray. But the question did not leave him: if the girl is from a rich family, then what about her clothes? She was very surprised by such a manner of communication, because why did he begin to talk to her so respectfully? So she asked him to speak the way he used to. The patient she was talking about was her father and urgently needed help. She began to tell that it started quite recently. His skin on his chest turned red and some strange bumps appeared. Everything was very swollen, and became the size of a balloon. The guy offered his finger to his chin, and began to analyze the situation. It became worse for a malignant tumor. But in any case, he must first look at and analyze the patient. And if he is right, then every minute counts now. He was very upset, because if this is a malignant tumor the size of a balloon, then you really need to hurry up, because it would not be too late. The girl and the guy began to move quickly to the appointed place. And now, after a few minutes, they had already arrived, so the girl suggested that they go there as soon as possible. And the guy at that moment looked at their house, and was very surprised, but then he realized that the girl was from a rich family. Immediately at the entrance, first meet the butler, who is joyful and first welcome. The girl ran up to him and began to grab him by the jacket, asking how his father felt. But he had really bad news. He said that his condition had become very bad, and he died suddenly. This frightened her very much and made her cry, because she could not believe it. Immediately after that, she began to run, and the butler tried to stop her. The child could not believe that this really happened, because this could not be. She ran into the room screaming and started screaming, trying to talk to her father. But at that moment her mother was already there, who was sitting and also crying, after which she looked at her daughter. She also decided to move closer to her father, whose tumor was already very large indeed, but she still hoped that he would be fine. Ray decided not to stand aside and approached the girl, asked her permission to examine her father. He began to analyze the current situation and saw there really 3 very large tumors that had been in the patient's body for a long time. Looking at them closer, he realized that they really sucked a lot of energy from his body. Putting his hand to his body, he still faintly, but still felt his father's heartbeat. Therefore, he concluded that he is still alive, so there is still a possibility to save him. From this, everyone was very shocked, including the butler, his mother and daughter. And the daughter began to grab his clothes, begging to save their father. Tears really began to flow in her eyes. She is not ready to believe it. And Ray himself only analyzed what was happening and realized that this was really his chance to prove what he was capable of. He looked at them and smiled, making it clear that he could handle it and there was absolutely no reason to worry. While he continued to examine his patient, along with his daughter, misunderstanding began to reign in the room, because all the people were really very shocked, because they did not know who this child was. But the butler said that Ray came with the girl. No one could believe that she had so thoughtlessly let some simple person into the house. One of them started screaming, because he was very surprised by the fact that this guy was going to resurrect the dead Viscount. Is he some sort of swindler? Asked to come here and now plans to steal their jewelry. But his wife continued to cry, because she did not understand what is now the meaning of my words. She looked at the guy, and realized that she needed to cling to every opportunity now, so she only had to believe that this boy could work a miracle. The tumors were really very big, everything turned so black and the body began to rot. The guy activated his magic and realized that he needed to concentrate all the flow of mana on the tip of his finger and thus create a scalpel. At that moment, everyone was shocked and started screaming in fear as they had never seen anything like this before. They prevented the guy from working, constantly asking what is he trying to do right now. But he did not listen to them and simply closed his ears. But he really didn't like it very much, so he decided to explain everything by saying, "I'm trying to fix everything, isn't it obvious?" But still no one wanted to believe him. He was already so tired of it that he just exhaled and said, if they don't believe him, then he can just leave, if of course they don't mind. His wife started screaming at the security guard. She seemed to be very agitated and aggressive as well. She looked at him, then ordered him to try to believe this young boy, let him do his job. After the order was given, the young guy told everyone to leave the room, and with their cry they interfere with work. The guard, of course, clenched his hand into a fist, and thought to himself that this child is really very cheeky. Ray decided to act, and noticed that after he pierced the tumor, only pus came out instead of blood. He looked at her again and realized that it was not just a tumor, but something special. Having studied it more closely, he realized that it was formed under the influence of poison. It seems that someone wanted to poison the king a long time ago. Therefore, he continued to stand near the king and tried to help him by forming a huge magic circle around himself with the help of mana. It's time for a full-fledged operation, so he got ready and began to straighten his elbows. After he prepared for the operation, he still has great skills from a past life. He immediately formed a scalpel from his finger, as well as other necessary tools, and was ready to start the process. First of all, he needs to remove those parts that have already festered so that the infection is not transmitted to healthy organs. The whole family watched this process, and they were also really a little embarrassed by the fact that this was all done by a little 15-year-old genius. He also needed to make an incision in his right side on the side of his chest. After he did this, he grimaced a little at what he saw, since the picture was not the most pleasant. And it happened as he expected. Even the lungs were affected, which means that the disease has been progressing for a long time. He was very interested to know why no one had considered him before. But fortunately, now he will be able to fully engage in his treatment, which he is doing right now. The rotted part of the lungs is not that big, so it can be easily restored. Immediately after that, truly magical things began to happen on the operating table. Ray decided to create a surgical thread using mana, after which he planned to use it and sew up the body. All his skills, which he had been honing for 10 years in the library, were very useful to him right now, because he continued to work a miracle in front of the whole family. They were all as shocked as possible, but no one was screaming or resisting his actions. Everyone was just watching. Suddenly, another maid came up, who said that the boy brought by the young mistress was really very smart. Also, the butler complimented him, because he also did not expect him to be so cool. But the guy was as focused and serious as possible, despite the fact that he already had charisma, which is not inherent in his age, just like skillful hand movements. He was truly a genius who is born once every 1,000 years. He continued to sew up his patient as if he were in the operating room in a past life. He only had one last stitch left to do. Everyone watched him and concluded that he was like a puppeteer who was pulling the strings. No one could say anything bad about him, because everyone was shocked that he really was such a cool specialist. Almost no one had any doubts that Ray could really work a miracle and save their patient. The maid who literally just arrived was also shocked by this, because she had never seen anything like this in her life. Therefore, together they looked at the guy again, and both agreed with this. The operation was not easy, so the guy was sweating a little, and decided to wipe his forehead, as he was almost finishing the operation. He has already done all the main points, and also sewed up all the wounds of the patient. Only the simplest task remains, just to start the heart so that it works. He began to give him artificial heart massage, and in addition, he decided to create an automatic external defibrillator, which is intended to restore the normal functioning of the heart, all with the help of his magic. And after he himself created a defibrillator, he began to massage the heart, stimulating its work. And after just a minute of time, the patient's heart began to beat again. It began to be covered with blood. Everything was so cool done, as in a previous life. The guy received unexpected positive emotions, because for the first time he managed to save the patient in this life. He turned to the patient's family and then informed them that the operation was indeed a success. Everyone was shocked, including the guard who disliked this guy so much. But Ray was no less surprised, because he did not understand why they had such a reaction. Looking at the patient again, he saw that blood was coming from his mouth, so everything became clear to him. Due to the fact that the blood in the dead body suddenly began to circulate, there was a strong bleeding, which must be corrected now. Here the guard really could not stand it a little, and could hardly restrain his emotions. But it did not last long, after which he immediately began to poke his fingers at the guy and scream, accusing him of being a scammer, which he was sure of from the very beginning. But Ray did smile, and he felt a little embarrassed as he tried to explain to everyone what just happened. But the guard absolutely did not believe him, and tried to convince everyone else of this, since the patient still continued to lie dead. Is he alive? The guard was very angry, so he asked the guy if he really wants to explain to him right now and prove that the patient is alive. Can't he see that blood is flowing from him? But Ray tried to calm them down, because for him it was not a problem. This is a normal moment during the operation. The most important thing is that the patient is alive. But no one wanted to listen to him, since he simply opened the body of the deceased. Does he really not have at least a drop of humanity? Ray clutched his head, as it was very strange to him that absolutely no one wanted to listen to him, despite the fact that he tried to explain everything. At that moment, the girl also entered into a dialogue, and told him that he had promised her that he could definitely save her father. She looked at Ray and started screaming because she just trusted him. But the guy continued to be shocked, because he really did his job well, and the patient really did not die. The girl asked to look at him, at the moment when the patient continued to lie down, not showing active signs of life. She continued to cry very hard, because her father had just died, because of this guy, since the girl brought him to her house. Ray was very upset. He could not understand why she did not believe him. All he asked was just to wait a little. It's really very strange, because what's wrong with them? Do they really not know what an operation is? Absolutely unexpectedly for him, all the guards began to insult the guy. One of them even put a sword to his neck. The guard started yelling that the guy had killed the Viscount. And now he still dares to argue with the young mistress? He called another guard for help, and also asked if what he had done with the body of the king was not enough for him. They approached him even closer, and began to threaten with weapons, which Ray clearly did not expect. He exhaled, and said that saving his life was indeed not easy. And instead of gratitude, they just bared their balls and sent them towards the guy. He addressed the guard in a rude tone, asking him to repeat what they were trying to accuse Ray of. Do they really believe that he is the swindler who killed the Viscount? From this, he got very angry, and became as aggressive as possible, saying that this time, they definitely contacted the wrong one. Indeed, not everyone is ready to endure the loss of a loved one, and everyone has their own different emotions. As a doctor, the guy understood this, and it was clear to him that they were seriously angry. He looked at the guards and put his hands in his pockets, waiting for the fight to begin. But he also gave himself an account that nothing else could be expected from this world, in which he had just begun to appear as a person. He exhaled, and tried to explain to them once again in a calm tone that the operation was indeed successful and that a little time was needed. He was about to leave, and said that they looked at the patient after a short period of time, since he needed to recover from the operation, and now, in order not to waste time, he would just go. He looked at them and got angry, making it clear that they should not stop him in any way. But the guard was very angry. It was clear that he did not like the guy from the very beginning, so there was a feeling that he was ready to break him right now. And so it happened, he could not control himself and pulled out a sword, saying that he would destroy the guy for disrespect. Rei was as cold-blooded as possible, since this is not the first conflict situation in his life. Who was trying to stab him with his magic chains? He did not expect that this could happen to him, because how could such a small guy be able to shackle him with magic? How is this possible? He was like a defenseless child, watched by his entire army and waiting for instructions. No wonder he immediately ordered an attack on this guy. Although he was scared, he understood that Rei would not be able to use several spells in a row, so he needed to hurry. But Rei was really smart, so with a slight movement of his hand he used his next grip. A few seconds later, 2 knights were immediately chained and disarmed. The most important commander was really frightened, and already began to worry a little, because really the guy in his youth had mastered double magic? The commander looked at him and could not understand how he got such knowledge of magic. But the guy really understood very much in him and is strong. It was clear that he was not ready to give himself offense, especially when he did everything as correctly as possible. He looked again at all 3 guards who were trying to catch him, and like a true gentleman, he said that he was warning them for the last time. He ordered the guards not to even try to catch him. It was already really dark outside. The guy spent a lot of his time with them, which he could have spent on learning from the same magic. He was upset that his time was wasted, and no one appreciated his abilities. He realized that no matter how far they were from modern medicine. But such behavior is already quite savagery. It was unpleasant for him that everyone held him for a stupid child. Besides, they also called him a fraudster. But he did not doubt himself a bit, and went to the door of his house, rejoicing that this was really the first patient who had been cured in this world. As he thought, his medical background is of little help in this world. His mother was waiting for the guy, and therefore decided to ask why he came home so late. But he told her that he was really very busy, so he didn't even keep track of the time. She began to scold him, because does he really not remember what time she ordered him to be at home? He was supposed to come back at 7 p.m. Did he not look at the time? There are really a lot of bad people in this world. Why didn't he think about his mother, and what would she have to do if something happened to the guy? Therefore, she punished him and now he will sit at home for 2 days. She continued to scold him and used her index finger while Rei himself just tilted his head and listened. It was very unpleasant for him, because why everyone everywhere keeps him for a small child. That is why this thought did not allow him to sleep peacefully and he spent the whole night in insomnia. Meanwhile, in the mansion of the king, to whom the guy just performed the operation, really interesting things began to happen. The king woke up and asked everyone what had just happened. In addition, he did not leave the thought of who is this guy after all. Everyone was shocked, including his daughter, who started shouting in the direction of her father from happiness, rejoicing that he could speak again. He burst into tears of happiness, because life returned to him again, which means that it is not yet time for him to die. The daughter and her wife were very surprised and frightened at the same time, because they had never seen such a miracle before. Who insulted the guy and wanted to destroy him was also shocked in the same way, because he couldn't believe that his employer was alive. But how could this happen? He hid his weapons and could not believe that the Viscount had really been resurrected. Immediately after that, they began to remember the words that they spoke in the direction of the guy. They took him for a scam. In addition, the guard also felt ashamed that he insulted him and wanted to kill him. The wife also closed her eyes and began to cry, because a young guy in whom no one believed could work a miracle. They looked at their room and realized that it was a huge mistake. After all, they did not even thank their savior in any way. That is why the wife ordered the security guard to take responsibility and find the guy as soon as possible. Patamushta, this issue is a matter of honor for their family. The guard was very shocked. Did he really have to take responsibility for this? He took a step and said that it was indeed very stupid magic. But his wife insisted that he find him as soon as possible and apologize for his rudeness, with which he, of course, agreed and began to carry out this order. The butler was also shocked, and still could not believe that such a young boy did such a miracle. Is he really a saint? Suddenly they all turned sharply in the same direction and were frightened by this phrase. They looked at the window and continued to discuss the guy, because they had never heard that saints could use magic, so it was incomprehensible to them. The butler looked at his king, and then asked everyone to also notice how prettier his face was. Have you all seen it? He's definitely gone to hell. The guard was terrified and asked everyone in the room, because if he is not a saint, how did he bring the king back from the other world? A huge emblem has appeared, so who are the saints? They are chosen by the gods themselves and endowed with incredible divine power. This is an opportunity to hear the will of the Lord. It is they who are destined for the fate of God's favorites. And they are also God, only in human form. The wife grabbed her chin and got very nervous, because was that boy really one of them? She had never heard that there were saints in their kingdom. Perhaps the rumors about his greatness have not yet spread strongly enough, since even the high priest could not cure the illness of their relative. If he is a saint, then the commander of the knights made a really big mistake. He already understood this himself, so he asked for forgiveness, because with his ignorance he disgraced the honor of the whole family. The wife was upset, but nevertheless said that it was the fault of all those who are in this room. Therefore, the girl offered to go in search of a guy and ask for forgiveness. At that moment, the father also woke up, who began to ask what they were talking about there. This scared his daughter a little. And he held on to his chest, where they had just been early after the operation, and also asked what is the other saint that they are discussing. What were they trying to do behind his back? But his daughter approached him, after which she reported that the saint was able to heal him. The father hit his papa with his fist on the blanket, and decided to ask, did he really wake up thanks to the saint? After that, he looked at the guards and started yelling at them, as they also managed to get rude to him. He was ready to tear them apart, because how dare they do that? He looked at his hands and felt young again, so he ordered them to find him immediately. It is necessary to connect absolutely everyone who is in the mansion in order to find it by any possible means. He once again looked at the room, after which he began to shout, ordering him to immediately begin this task. Well, Ray continued to sit in his room and read literature about magic, but he noticed that his ears were really burning very strongly. Did someone start discussing him so much?